I'm just trying to make that barbershop poster where they have all the different cuts. The classic Caesar.
I can't keep on losing you over complications. Gone too soon. Wait.
Your video.
Hanging. I can't seem to hold on to. Dang.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Session 7, Careers in Cannabis for our HBCU Cannabis Equity Initiative Virtual Learning Community and Certification Program. How is everyone doing this morning?
Doing great, doing great.
Awesome.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you. So I'll start off with a little bit of information about Cannavation Analytics. We are a cannabis company. We focus on social equity engagement. We focus on development with colleges. And we initially started this, we initially got into this space through my work as an environmental justice advocate and kind of a little mixture of my college experience majoring in biology. And so a friend of ours grows up in Humboldt and provided me with some of their bio waste. And I was able to convert that bio waste into wonderful cannabis products that a lot of my older relatives love. I make bath salts, bath bombs, and bath soap, excuse me. And so from there, we started thinking about how we could get students from historically Black colleges, our peers, and other alums into the space. And that's when we decided to engage folks during homecoming. And in lieu of us now being virtual, we normally have an in-person engagement where we work with 12 historically Black colleges and help to provide them with information that will allow them to gain entry into the cannabis space and to also prepare them for future opportunities that are arising out of this wonderful industry. And so I combine my social justice work with my environmental justice work and just always being an advocate in general in my community. I'm a commissioner for the city of Berkeley. And so through my connections or my experience with policy or politicians, I've been able to maneuver through this industry. And today you all will be talking about how you all entered into the cannabis space, and we all have different stories, unique opportunities. And today that's what we're here to share with everyone else. So I'm gonna pass things over to Keith Mosley. Keith, take it over. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Keith Mosley, and I, along with Kinshasa Taylor, have been working on doing advocacy in the state of Georgia and looking for ways to get minorities more incorporated into the cannabis space. And we're looking at, this list of these past few weeks as an opportunity to provide individuals with a chance to be able to, just learn more about the industry that is taking off at a rapid pace, and we don't want people to get left behind. So with that being said, we'll start off with introductions, and I'll start off with you first, Reese, from Caliva. You can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, everyone. Oh, I don't know what just happened. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So yeah, my name is Reese. I do work at Caliva. So before I get into like the career aspect on, how I entered the industry, just a quick background on sort of my relationship to cannabis is I really did not have an affinity towards cannabis at all in high school. My friends, my closest friends, they smoked weed all the time. They were frequent users. I was that friend in the group who was like, I'm good, y'all. I'm paranoid, I'm good. And to be honest, the reason I kind of was like that is I come from a family who the war on drugs deeply affected. 4 out of 6 of my aunts and uncles are, you know, recovering addicts. And so my grandma, she just kind of instilled that into her grandkids as she was raising some of us, just like, you know, don't do drugs. She called it dope for a very long time. Just this year, I got her to finally stop calling it dope and understand the healing benefits of it. And you know, that's natural for, you know, your grandma to have that sort of feeling towards this plan if it's, you know, affecting her kids so deeply, the war on drugs. And so fast forward to college is when I kind of started using it recreationally. I would use it just for stress management and cramps, to be honest. And even back in college, I didn't really have like any knowledge towards understanding like the plan and why it was criminalized and why I felt a way towards it. And that didn't really come until after graduating college. So I graduated in 2014 from Washington State University. I'm from Seattle, Washington. I was actually born and raised there, lived there my entire life up until 3 years ago. And while I was at Washington State, I studied apparel merchandising, marketing, and public relations. I've always wanted to be a buyer for like a fashion brand or CPG company, which I did go on to do after college in 2014. I worked for a small apparel company in Seattle for about 3 years as an assistant buyer there. And then I was recruited by Walmart Labs here in the Bay Area as a buyer for the Samsung TV department. So I did that at Walmart for 2 years. And when I first moved to California, I ended up meeting people who worked in cannabis. So one of my good friends, she actually was launching a business back in 2017 in cannabis. And I was like, it was just interesting to me because I never thought about cannabis and launching a business and understanding it from a business perspective. It was just kind of like this thing that I consumed, but I didn't really fully understand it. So 2017, I just started doing my research to really understand the industry and really understand this plant and understand why it was criminalized. And once I started understanding that, it was kind of like almost immediate where I just knew I had to get into this industry. So the thing I did is I just pivoted my skills from Walmart.com and the previous company, and then what I learned in college, I pivoted those skills to the industry. And I started looking for jobs. I started going to like networking events here in the Bay Area and getting involved in some of the social equity efforts around the city. And so from there, Caliva hired me. It took them a while to hire me. Like when I initially reached out to them, they weren't ready and a bunch of other stuff. And then they eventually reached back out to me, ended up hiring me in 2019, last year, October, as a business manager. So I was on the sales operations side, doing a lot of their forecasting, planning, and buying. So again, just pivoting those careers into this space is what kind of how was like my approach to it. So I did that from October to about 3 weeks ago. And then now I'm on the marketing team. So I'll be doing some of the paid advertising with Caliva and just running some of the paid programs. So it's super exciting. It's very fast, as you guys, I'm sure all of us know, it's a fast-paced industry to keep up with, but it's definitely exciting, and it's definitely something that, you know, I want to get more Black people, more of my peers into this space because it's so important. It's very white. Everybody I work with is white. And it's unfortunate because again, like, you know, somebody from like me who comes from that background of, you know, those 4 aunts and uncles who like that just deeply affects them. It's like, okay, well, this is a criminalized thing, but it should not be. And I think it's just about educating and advocating for this plant. So that's my background on how I entered the industry.
All right, that's a nice introduction. moving along, we're going to move to Najee Tyler next. If you could give us a brief introduction.
How you guys doing? Najee Tyler, originally from Queens, New York. Growing up, I've been around cannabis growing up a lot, just from the neighborhood that I'm from, and just growing up, people I was around and family members, all had a good, rich history in cannabis. So, I grew up as an athlete. Went on to play college football at Purdue, and then later on graduated from Hampton University. So, just just I think it was natural growing up. I was around the plant a lot, but I wasn't using it. So and I like, a lot of other people didn't really have like a negative look upon it, because I saw people were able to be very productive on it. I saw a lot of people in my neighborhood and people I grew up around, I think reaped the benefits of it at that time, financially. So I never looked at it as being something that was like super negative. It just wasn't for me, just because I always looked at like athletes don't use it. It's just like, that was just the thing. It was like, you're an athlete, you're not going to use cannabis, and that's just what it was. Going into college, that's when I started seeing that other players on my team was more open to it than I was. And it was just a regular thing for them. It wasn't something that it really interfered with playing. And then also just like the more and more I kept playing, the more and more I kept being around people who ended up being like professional athletes. I seen that it was very normalized. And it was something that they all did to decompress from, just like the long practice weeks and game weeks of what's up. So I didn't necessarily look at it as being a career until it was probably after college, where after college I got an internship with Combs Enterprise. So I was working at Combs Enterprise on a bunch of like the Ciroc, De Leon launch, and doing a lot of the spirit stuff with them. And then moved on to work with Team Epiphany, where we launched Hypnotic for the second time. So very in the spirits side of it. And it wasn't actually until I started working with Cogent Entertainment Marketing, where it's still on the spirits, working with Constellation brands and working with Corona, Modelo, Pacifico, and, really Constellation, they dived in and started working in the cannabis field when they took a really big investment into it. So that's when I started looking at it as like, wow, like what's some of the things that we could do like to further the business and try to get on that side of the business. And ended up having a conversation with Al Harrington, who's the founder of Viola, and had the conversation with him to try to really win the business of marketing over there. So I was just pitching to him one day. We're at Soul House, and I'm pitching to him like, hey, these are the different things that we could do. This is like the cannabis industry is super early, and I feel like we could really expand into it and, make Viola that lifestyle brand that you're looking to do. So as we're going, I could tell that, he's taking in a lot what I'm saying. And he's like, okay, he's like, so, if we take on Cogent, who's going to be the day-to-day person that will work with us? And I was like, me. And he was like, so why don't you just come work with us then? Why we got to take your agency? So then I was like, wow, like he was like, yeah, whatever we got to do, let's make it happen. Like just come over. We could work with them too, but I want you to be on the team. So then came over to Viola, been at Viola for about 2 years now. And we're the largest Black-owned cannabis brand in the space. We operate in four different states. So we're in California, Michigan, Oregon, Colorado, and I head up the VP of marketing. Me and Erica Pittman just really leading the force on the marketing side. So that's the real intro into it, and that's how I got into it, just trying to pitch the business to him and bring the agency on, but looking at the bigger picture, like, wow, could be actual career in it. And that's where I'm at now.
All right. Thanks for that intro. Next up, we have Sean York. If you give us a brief introduction about yourself and how you got into the industry.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Sean York. I'm originally from Dallas, Texas. So being from Texas, cannabis is not what I grew up wanting to get into. I actually wanted to be a basketball player, but then hit my growth spurt, so missed out on that wave. But I did run track. I went to Morehouse College, and then also got my MBA at Clark Atlanta right after. I originally wanted to go into advertising, didn't do that, started out in tech for a while doing marketing and product management. And after a while in tech, I just kind of wanted to go back into marketing. I felt like I was wasting my time and not utilizing my degrees. So I started doing some job searching. And while I was doing my job searching, I stumbled upon a job for a marketing manager role at a small cannabis company. And at the time, I did not know it was cannabis. They were just like, it's private. We'll tell you more about it when you get to the interview. So originally, I was thinking this is like some shady startup here in the Bay Area. I don't know about it, but I just took that chance, took that risk, met with the company, learned more about it, and come to find out they were one of the biggest farms in Humboldt County, and worked in cannabis. So I was just taking it all in, kind of like what Reese said earlier. The war on drugs did have a huge effect on my family as well. And just growing up in Texas, like my mom was super religious, so she would always tell us like, hey, stay away from drugs. I was always in church, say no, like everything was just anti-drugs for me. But I just felt like being Black and seeing how the war on drugs and cannabis affected my people and my family, I felt like I could try to change that narrative by coming in and taking that role and telling the story of how cannabis is good, how it's more medicinal and beneficial for people of all backgrounds. So I started out with a farm in Humboldt County called Eel River Organics. And then just recently, I transferred over into a bigger company called InterReserve. We're a multi-state company based out of Nevada and California. I had head of branding. We are vertically integrated, so we have our own growth facilities, distribution, a couple of dispensaries. One of them that I'm running right here, 212 California Street in San Francisco. And then also we have 4 in-house brands that I manage on all aspects of marketing.
All right. Appreciate that introduction. Next up, we have Chris Kelly.
Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Chris Kelly, and I'm excited to be here. I appreciate hearing the stories from Reese, Sean, and Najee, and it really solidifies, quite frankly, why I got in the business. So I've been working, obviously, a little longer than these guys have. And I currently work for TrueLeave, and for folks that don't know TrueLeave, we're based in Tallahassee, Florida, and we do about 480 million in sales. We've got about 3,400 employees, 57 stores, and we're across Florida. We have 1 store in California, Connecticut, and we're setting up business in Massachusetts. And we're also a vertically integrated business. I run the wholesale business forum, and I also sit on the executive leadership team. The reason my story is a little bit different is because after, I guess, about almost 20 years of working, and it was all in the consumer product goods space, working for blue chip companies like PepsiCo and Kellogg's and Diageo. So Najee, you probably know Diageo, being in the spirits business. But after having worked for those guys for almost 20 years, I just kind of woke up and said, what am I doing here? And I just had that calling that said, hey, I want to get into a business where we have a product, we have a service that's really making kind of a difference in this world. So I put out some feelers, and to some of my executive recruiters, which I think is very important that we maintain those relationships. And of course, they had some great jobs, quite frankly, making more money than I was at Kellogg's. But I had to stay true to what it was that I really wanted to do. And again, it was about being with a company that is making a difference out here. So ironically, I also had that conversation with some of my friend network, if you will. And TrueLeave had, I guess, called one of them. They weren't interested. And I started kind of looking at, TrueLeave, what is TrueLeave? And, similar to some of the stories I've heard here, especially from Sean and Najee, grew up, in an athlete, and, marijuana was just not, not part of the program. But as I started to, kind of do my homework, and I saw, some of the things that Truly was involved in from a D&I perspective, from a social justice, social equity, the fact that, they had put their almost, million square feet of cultivation in a primarily Black county right outside of Tallahassee. There was a lot of things that said, hey, this is a company that that I want to be part of. And quite frankly, as I did my research and I looked at other big marijuana, so, the MSOs, the Curaleaf, the Crescos, I didn't see really anybody, quite frankly, that looked like us. And I'm very competitive. I told you about that sports background. And I said, man, I've got to get into this, because I think there's so much good, that we can do. And I will tell you that my first, couple months, I wasn't necessarily proud of what I did. I mean, it was still, hey, I'm kind of doing marijuana, and I've got a 15-year-old daughter. And she's like, Dad, I always understood what you did. You sold cornflakes, you sold, Frito-Lay. Now what are you, a weed dealer? And for the folks that have, small kids, to get more than about a minute of the time on any type of conversation before you get tuned out is something. And I will tell you, I had about a 25-minute conversation with my daughter around products and, the huge value and the difference that our products, the industry's products, making people's lives in terms of making them better. And after that conversation, she was like, Dad, I got it. And I will tell you what, since then, coupled with, experiences that I've had with, talking to patients and dealing with some social equity applicants and understanding kind of their stories up in Massachusetts, it's really made me just super focused about getting after and creating opportunities for others. I tell the story, and I know a couple people out there on the West Coast. I think in my first month, I went to Hall of Flowers, which is a big, I call it kind of a trade show, if you will, out there. And then, people introduced me, hey, that's the OG of this, the OG of that, OG. And of course, there wasn't anybody that looked like us there. And I'm like, hold on, how can all these people be the OG? And I don't see anybody that looks like us. I mean, it was a big, big, big disconnect. So I got to tell you, I mean, I guess I'm fortunate that I'm in a position, within Truly, within the industry that, I can kind of, drive some things and make a difference. And, I'm excited every day to get up and go to work. I mean, people say that, when you find the job, you find the career where you're having fun. I mean, you're busting your butt, you're working hard, but it really doesn't feel like a job. And you feel like, you're bettering things and bettering the world and creating opportunities for people. It's a fun place to be. So I thoroughly look forward to, conversation today and hearing people's stories, but thanks for having me.
All right, I appreciate that. We appreciate that introduction. Next up, we have Ms. Lynette. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got into the cannabis industry.
Hi, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, giving you greetings from New York City, and really, really happy to see so many of my HBCU alumni and having this conversation today. So my background, I am very proud of my HBCU roots in Albany State University, the unsinkable ASU in Albany, Georgia. I was actually recruited at my college, my senior year of school, from a pharmaceutical company for a mid-level management position. And that's how I got interested in human resources specifically, and then how I was able to move from Georgia to New York City for the pharmaceutical industry. Worked human resources there for 8+ years, left there to do some HR consulting and fell in love with startups and the culture and problem solving and the fast paced moving, and really felt my energy and passion there. And then got a call from one of my colleagues that I used to work with at the big box retail pharmaceutical company about an opportunity with Curaleaf. And they were employee number 1. I was employee number 3 with Curaleaf New York. And now here we are almost 3 years later with thousands of employees across 25+ states, with 100+ dispensaries, and still growing. And, the reason I'm so passionate and so excited, not only because I have the skill set of human resources, but I'm so thankful and blessed to be working in this industry, is very similar to Najee, where I grew up around cannabis. And I never had a negative connotation about cannabis or the industry. My family are performers. They're in the internet, they are on the internet, but in the entertainment. And being entertainers and living across seas in Europe for the first 13 years of my life, it was regular usage, but not necessarily always through inhalation. It was a lot of, my mom used to cook with cannabis, and I just knew the cookie jar on this side, was for the kids, and the other cookie jar, you don't go in there. That's the adult cookies, right? And so it was always accepted. I saw productive people. I saw educated people. I saw Black people who looked like me from my community using cannabis. It wasn't until I went into corporate America and started getting the stigmas that it is frowned upon on, and learning about the war on drugs in my own community. And that for sure definitely set me up for my passion for this industry, and being able to bring my skills that are transitional from human resources and the background that I know from the pharmaceutical industry, but over to bringing in careers in cannabis, and specifically people of color and communities of minority of demographics that are affected, on how we can bring more employment, more education, more resources to this industry. And so I have to say that through all of that, the one thing that, with me growing up with that perception around cannabis, it definitely made this job more challenging, because I did not go into knowing the stigmas and the ignorance that surrounded. And by far, this has been the most challenging career that I've been in, because it's constant obstacles, whether it's from legislation, whether it's from the DOH, whether it's state laws, the specific, understanding that each state is different, and what the challenges we have, both within our community and as well as in this medical cannabis community. And so I'm in it for to ensure that we continue to diversify this industry. I know that big cannabis is absolutely getting a bad name, and completely understand that. But to what Chris' point was saying earlier, it's really not all big cannabis is bad cannabis. Do your research. Understand what these big players are and what they are doing in this space and how they're doing it. And that's where we can get our education and make that selection. But I'm proud to sit on a team where I'm not the only person of color on an executive level. I'm not the only woman of color. Shout out to our Vice President of Corporate Responsibilities, Khadija Tribble, as well as our amazing CMO, who made history as the first Black registered organization to be a CMO at that title. It's Jason White. It's phenomenal to see like-minded people who are working on the inside, pushing out, as well as working with our activists and our advocates in our communities, working and to push in. I do believe it takes both in order for us to make progress in this space, and so proud and so blessed to be around amongst all of you all colleagues. So thank you.
All right, and thank you for that introduction. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and then we'll come back and we'll start off with some questions. So the first question is for you, Reese. Could you tell us or tell the audience, what was the biggest adjustment for you moving from a traditional corporate job to the cannabis industry, in addition to growing up with the stigmas that you had surrounding cannabis?
Yeah, so I think my biggest adjustment from going from corporate world, Walmart.com into cannabis, Caliva, smaller company, was honestly, I kind of mentioned this before, was just the fast pace and how much this industry changes. I think one of the biggest things that I had to realize, and I think that we kind of all realize, is you really do have to do your research and stay in the know in the cannabis industry. So one of the things I started doing back in I think it's 2018, before I even got hired at Caliva, is I just signed up for Google Alerts for cannabis. And I think that's something really good that some attendees can kind of take away, is understanding what's going on in this space and understanding how you can come into the space and sort of change narratives for what you're passionate about, or whatever your skill set is. And so the challenge was it just being so fast paced and kind of adapting to the learning and the knowledge of the space. But at the end of the day, cannabis is cannabis. And I was working on, like I said, I was working on the wholesale team. So the sale of cannabis is the sale of cannabis. It's going to sell. So that was that part of it. But then just kind of thinking of the stigma of the plant. The reason I actually left, one of the reasons I left sort of the corporate world and came into the cannabis space, is I enjoyed cannabis. Corporate did not enjoy people enjoying cannabis. It's looked down upon. I think Lynette mentioned this, but it's not something that's embraced in the corporate world. And I didn't like not being able to create certain content on my social media, because I feel like people from, Walmart.com or whomever else in the corporate world is looking at my social media. I need to be able to use my voice. And so that was kind of the thing for me, is I just wanted to be able to pivot and work into something where I can feel and be myself and actually still make an impact. And it just wasn't there for me in the corporate world. So that was kind of my adjustment there.
Okay. Appreciate that. Next up, we have an introduction from Michael Self with Cresco. If you could give us a brief introduction about yourself and how you got into the space.
Hey, everybody. So grateful to be here and to, hear everyone talk about their experience, particularly working with MSOs, because sometimes I feel like I am an island of one. And feel like, oh, did I sell out because I work for Cresco? So that's huge. So I really appreciate being amongst some peers here. It's very refreshing. So my background is different, I think, from most. My background is in mental health, and I'm also here in Chicago. I didn't say that, but my background is in mental health, and my career started with a fascination of abnormal psychology and wanting to be a therapist. And so I worked in public health. I worked for governmental organizations in that area of mental health and therapy. So I'm a trained therapist. So how I'm in cannabis, I don't know what happened, but over a series of years in my career, I got more involved in social justice, really based on my experience and based on my academics. And so I just wanted to pursue a career in social justice and ended up in the correctional field. So for about 10 years, I worked in the juvenile detention center here in Chicago. And then I worked as a consultant around the country to jails, prisons, and juvenile facilities all over the United States. And my focus was issues of conditions of confinement and the related issues for people that are considered vulnerable populations in corrections. So LGBT people, religious issues, people with disabilities, issues of race and culture. So I did a lot of training and executive coaching and policy development in relation to the changing laws at the federal level, as well as local laws. Excuse me. So yeah, I consider myself working in cannabis. I feel like I do justice work for different organizations. So I would not consider myself a cannabis professional per se. I didn't come to cannabis I didn't come to Cresco with any prior cannabis experience. Cannabis definitely was something that I was aware of, but I think I had an underlying sense of the stigma and the myths of cannabis that you all have spoken about. So it wasn't something that was in my life on a regular, and if it was perceived as in a negative light. But I really started getting more interested in the cannabis industry from the perspective of the social equity area. And so I really wanted to figure out how I could be a social equity applicant, to be honest, and learning about the Illinois law and the social equity provision in the Illinois law. I realized really quickly that just based on my experience working with governments, that there's way more to it than just being a social equity applicant. Like, this is not easy, breaking into the cannabis industry and being a dispensary owner or a cultivator. So I figured, how could I use my background and my experience to be a part of the cannabis industry? And so that's how I ended up at Cresco, overseeing their social equity and educational development program, the SEED program. So that's why I'm here. I'm appreciative, again, of being included as part of this workshop. I went to U of I in Champaign, so I'm not an HBCU grad, but I have much respect for that. Thank you so much, Keith.
No problem. And thanks for that introduction. But while we have the spotlight on you, seeing as how you spent time in both the government space as well as corporate America, how was that transition for you to move from those somewhat rigid entities to now being in the cannabis space?
That's a good question. I think the environments back when there was a work environment, right now I'm in my dining room table, but the work environment was probably the biggest change. I remember one day I had on jeans and a sweater or something. I was going to work and my husband was like, "You going to work like that?" I'm like, "I'm dressed up," So the cannabis environment in general is much more casual. So that took some getting used to, and how you work with people and how you interact with your colleagues and other stakeholders in the industry is very casual. But I would say, based on the work that I did for governmental agencies or within governmental agencies, I feel like it's actually very similar, because my experience has been working on how correctional organizations need to incorporate the change in laws. So specifically, I focus on the Prison Rape Elimination Act and how were correctional agencies going to incorporate the provisions within the Prison Rape Elimination Act, regardless of their ability to do so, regardless of whether or not they liked it. This is outlined in federal law. Now, how do your policies need to match up? How does your culture need to match up? All of those different things. And I feel like that's really similar here in the cannabis industry. The laws are changing. So how do we then incorporate those laws into our society, into our organizations? And how do you help people get the most out of laws or provisions that were that had them in mind? So yeah, interestingly enough, I feel like it's parallel. I'm used to working with laws that change and folks like, well, what are we going to do with that? And trying to figure that out over time.
Okay. Thanks for that. Next up, Chris, we're going to put the spotlight on you. With you coming from definitely a more traditional background and a more conservative background, how has that transition been for you? And what are some of the goals that you'd like to accomplish being in the position that you're in now that you're in the cannabis space?
I would say a lot of what I think folks I think Reese talked about a little bit, the pace of change from where I came. When you think about Kellogg's or PepsiCo, is absolutely night and day. So you have to be okay with, having 80% of the information and moving on it. You can't wait until you get that 100%. So I would say that is one big thing. The other thing that I would say is the lack of kind of, formal processes, right? If you think about traditional kind of companies versus our space, we have a lot of good stuff that we're putting in place, and hopefully we can talk about it a little bit later. But, you come from a traditional company that has, great health insurance and a 401k and has, diversity inclusion council and all these mentorship programs, has on-campus recruiting, and you can go on and on and on. And then you come to our company and you don't have any of that. So that's been fun, putting that type of stuff in place. And I guess as I transition to goals, it would be exactly that. Similar to, the companies here that are represented today, there's a lot of great things going on in the industry. For us, I think the opportunity is to really be intentional about putting some programs together. For example, on campus recruiting. We had, I think about 2 years ago, we had a couple interns from FAMU, but it wasn't a kind of a formal program. So, we need to put things like that in place, right? Develop some, again, just being intentional about our recruiting efforts, be intentional about making sure that we have, D&I, which we're making progress, D&I and social equity and social justice initiatives that are on paper that, we're measuring ourselves against and we're making progress against, would be a couple things that I guess I would say that I'd like to see, both real hard objectives that we're making progress against in those areas, and then intentional activities around things like, recruiting to make sure that we're pulling, people of color and minorities into our organization.
All right. Thanks for that. Next up, Najee, want to kind of transition over to you. Seeing as how you've come from the alcohol industry, and there are some similar characteristics in both the cannabis and alcohol industry. How would you compare the two, and what would you say are some of the big differences between the cannabis and the alcohol industry? And where do you see the cannabis industry going as we legalize in more states?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities as far as definitely on the marketing side, and similar to like how you market it to consumers. Something that I've always found a little weird is that, like, with alcohol not having any like medical benefits, how cannabis is looked so down upon compared to alcohol, even when it comes to being able to do certain like marketing and like advertising, like paid advertising and stuff like that, and the limitations to it, especially when it comes to, the whole Facebook thing. It's just funny how, we used to spend millions of dollars on advertising for Constellation brands on Facebook and different avenues, and how cannabis is like so looked down upon and you can't do anything. And, you're in risk of every day of getting your Instagram page taken away. And it's just crazy to me. So I think as, as different things changes, as different bills continue to be passed, I do believe that cannabis will be a bigger industry than alcohol, the spirits industry, just because of the medical aspect of it. And I think people are starting to open more up to it. So I do think it's going to be a much bigger industry. So I think that's the big difference between it.
All right, appreciate that. We just recently had Rashad join from Ease. Rashad, if you give us a brief introduction about yourself and how you got involved in the cannabis industry.
Sure. Well, one, thank everybody for being on this panel, and I'm so thankful that Kinshasa asked me to be on it. I think there's a lot of great thought leaders on here, and I'm glad to be in this space. Just a little bit of background for me. So I come from a family that's deeply entrenched in California politics. And I had a mom who was a renowned like journalist and columnist for 30 years, and a father who played in the NFL. And so there was basically a synergy between, you know, health and wellness. I had like a hippie Berkeley mom and then a father from like New Orleans, Louisiana. But because my parents met in California, they kind of met, and I think they understood the value and the benefits of cannabis. So with that, I always knew that cannabis was something that I didn't have a stigma around, but I also wanted to proliferate its values to other groups and to other communities. And so, you know, I worked for the Oakland Raiders for 2 years, and then I moved over to politics and worked in kind of another disruptive industry. I wouldn't say necessarily as disruptive as cannabis, being something that's illegal, that's now illegal, but I worked in education reform, and I traveled around the country and mobilized specifically minority and predominantly Black cities to kind of take over their education system and have community-based schools that ultimately serve not only the community in that neighborhood, but the city as a whole, in terms of Black leadership running schools that had the goal of getting our kids to the best college opportunities. Following that, you know, I managed these family grants in order to kind of get these programs up in specifically some of these cities: Birmingham, Tulsa, Nashville, Memphis, Atlanta. And then, you know, around that time, it was kind of the bubble around tech, transportation tech, Lyft and Uber. And I thought that was just something that was extremely disruptive, but something that I thought cannabis could follow the lead in terms of getting the word out and making sure that people understood that not only was this something that helped people in the margin, but this was an opportunity for them to elevate and find different opportunities through this. And so with that, after the mayor that I worked for on the kind of the education reform stuff, I looked into working in the state legislature. And I had the luxury of and the pleasure of working for a state senator out of LA, Stephen Bradford, who really cared about cannabis and specifically social equity. And I'm sure he knew that I was a pro-cannabis guy. And so one day he walked into my office and was like, I know you like that shit. Why don't you write me a bill for it? And so I wrote the state social equity bill for the state of California, the first in the nation. And that kind of got me into the lane that I preferred, which was to be a cannabis advocate, but also be a cannabis politico and use my policy depth to kind of help not only those that want to get in the industry, but kind of right the wrongs from some of the war on drugs, which kind of has always been my lens. I come from a social activist background. And so for me, working in cannabis is not just about, you know, getting jobs for people like us in cannabis, but disrupting and destroying some of the negative narratives and sentiments around our community involved in cannabis and giving everybody that I think I've been in the space the opportunity to do so. And so with that, after I kind of wrote the social equity bill, I kind of had a lot of cannabis companies knocking down my door asking if I wanted to come on, because they were kind of getting in that space where they had built up their business framework, but they hadn't built out that social equity lens that is specifically in a democratic state like California, people were going to care about. And so I had the opportunity to come over to Ease. And of course, naturally, I was hesitant because, you know, it's a big white-run company. Never saw anybody that looked like me that worked for the company. Never heard of anybody that looked at me that worked for the company. But I, you know, interviewed with them and I let them know that, like, I'm going to be unapologetically Black about my work, and I'm going to also use every opportunity that we see for one group, for my group as well. And they were all for that. And so since then, I've been on Ease's team, and I work on license acquisition as well as writing policy and advocacy for specific cities and areas that we think are preferential for our operation. And so currently, I work for Ease. I've met Kinshasa. She's given me the great opportunity to speak at my college, Morehouse, as well. I'm also a Morehouse man. And so we are here now trying to, I guess, synergize and find the best ways and pathways for our community to get into the space holistically and genuinely, and not just be a box check for a company that knows that once the lens gets on them and they don't have people that look like the community is impacted by the war on drugs, they're going to necessarily lose some of their legitimacy. And so my goal is not only to provide those companies with legitimacy, but the legitimacy that we do provide comes from substance and the work that people have the right spirit about it plan on attacking. And so that's me, and that's kind of my background in the cannabis space.
All right, and thanks for that introduction. And while we have the spotlight on you, Rashad, what could you tell us would be some of the, the biggest challenges that you've seen in transitioning from the education space that you were in, as well as doing the work with Oakland Raiders, to now, you know, being in the cannabis space?
Well, you know, I think luckily I was able to work in the legislature and write this bill. And so I kind of got an idea of seeing the 120 perspectives of those legislators that would be voting on a cannabis bill. And so with that, I understood that there was just a gulf in understanding of the industry. And then I also realized that there was a connection between weed and every negative imagery of Black Americans possible. And so for me, it was about getting into these spaces and shifting the paradigms, not going in there like, oh, they let me in, let me just be comfortable and be happy and just stay out the way, but really go in there and be a bull in the china shop and force these people to acknowledge their entitlement, their privilege, and their lack of awareness for something, for an industry that they're standing on the shoulders of. I mean, a whole generation, multiple generations of our community have been disrupted, and now we have companies standing on the shoulders of those communities, making hand over fist money and not dispensing that money back into those communities that were impacted. And so I think the biggest struggle for a lot of people that I hear coming into the cannabis space is that they're taking the same steps that it took to get into regular corporate or regular nonprofit industries, where you just got to be safe and quiet and out the way to get the job, and then hopefully you can crack the door open and get other people in. For me, it was more, I'm going to crack the door open and I'm going to put a doorstop there and I'm going to stand in front of the door and welcome everybody as they come in. And so I think the biggest challenge for specifically leaders like us in this space, minority leaders, is to not be content with just our position, but, you know, high tides rise all ships. And so really just making sure that while I, you know, fend for my own sustainability and success, I also never forget the lens in which I'm in this space, which is to, you know, crack the door, not even crack the door, but bust the door open and let us get into the space. Because rightfully, if anyone wants to talk about it, we are the foundation of growing anything in this country. And so for us to kind of run away from the farm when we really should be owning it and letting people know that we are the natural green thumbs and the truest connection to the soil and earth, I think is important to maintain throughout our whole, you know, our process in the industry.
Right. No, definitely agree with all of that. All right. Next up, Sean. I know it's been a while since we've heard from you. Could you tell us what is a typical day like for you in the working in the cannabis space and doing what you do?
Cool, that's a hard question to answer. Typical day will look like, well, since we're a distribution company, I'm more so looking at what we have going on with our different vendors, what orders we might have coming in, making sure that all brands that we're taking on and sending out to our different stores, what promos we're running. So making sure just from a distribution standpoint, we are carrying good brands, making sure our distribution is tight and all of our products are going to the store. From a dispensary standpoint, working, you know, just doing deals, making sure we're bringing in customers. Najee mentioned that, you know, you can't really use Instagram or Facebook because, you know, your posts will get taken down. So coming up and working on different creative ways to bring people in the store now, since we're post-COVID now. Our main dispensary is in the financial district. So been working really hard, just coming up with like, what is some creative ways to get people to come into the dispensary versus, you know, people wanting to go online nowadays, and looking at what should we be doing to shift our traffic from ordering in the dispensary to ordering online as well. Should we, you know, push more on weed maps? Should we push more on Leafly? That is kind of like some of my day-to-day stuff. And then from a brand management standpoint, I have 4 different brands. So day-to-day brand development, taking pictures of, you know, flower. A couple weeks ago, actually, I had to go to the farm to see and procure some flower to put in the jars. So it's pretty much, I have my hands in a little bit of everything from a day-to-day standpoint.
And have you seen a significant difference between working with, you know, individuals, the farmers or the cultivators, versus working with other individuals in marketing? Is there a drastic difference in the culture amongst the different groups or departments within the cannabis company?
Yeah, most of the farmers are kind of like blue-collar workers. These are people that have been, you know, just outside every day, all day. Also like generational farmers. So there's a different level of emotional intelligence there with working with them versus coming into more of the corporate background with some of the other people in management that I work with on a day-to-day. Some of those individuals might come in from different consulting companies like McKinsey, or come in from like a technical background like myself, like working at Google and working at other small startups. Then you have to kind of take that into consideration, like, all right, when I'm in, this meeting about finance or marketing, I'm going to talk in the more about technical terminology like I was at Google, versus if I'm at the farm or just in the inventory standpoint, I'm actually talking to these people kind of like I'm actually selling drugs on the street some days. You got to sit there and look at the weed and break it down, figure out, okay, what are we going to do? We have 5 pounds. Are we going to do a pound of pre-rolls? Should we do a pound of edibles? How do we want to work this out? So you kind of have to regress a little bit when you're working with farmers and inventory into kind of more of a street terminology versus when you're in the boardroom.
All right, appreciate that. All right, so Lynette, we're going to come from California back to New York. Being in the HR space, when it comes to seeing as how the cannabis industry is fairly new, and as we can see from individuals on the panel, some people do have personal experience through use, but most people, everybody on the panel has gotten into the industry, kind of based off of their previous corporate or just work experience in general. So for individuals that are looking to transition into the cannabis space now, what are you looking at from an HR perspective with regards to making a decision, or what would your recommendations be for people trying to make that jump into the cannabis space to be attractive to a company like yours?
Yeah, really good question. I will tell you that, first off, let me back up. So when I first started with the company in this space, my title was Director of Human Resources and Outreach for Curaleaf New York. And 2 really different departments and very unique. I'll save you the time on how I got in charge of both of those departments. However, they worked hand in hand from the human resource aspect. So Director of Outreach is exactly that. You are out into the community educating about cannabis. And when doing that, and you're saying, okay, education on cannabis is exactly that, a Cannabis 101, who's coming to these education forums? Social equity candidates, people looking for a job, people specifically wanting to know, do they qualify? How can they become, anything and everything. And so what I quickly realized, I was like, this is great, because now I'm able to really source the entire community and say, okay, well, here's your information you need to become a patient. Outreach. Here's the information you need to become, if these are the positions we're hiring for education-wise in these positions. And then this is where you need to go to your legislation to push so that we can open up the doors to have this real social equity conversation at that level. But specifically when we go into careers and specifically in cannabis, I see, and in my experience, it has absolutely been a plus more than anything to be a patient. I myself am a patient of the program. I'm proud to have my New York medical marijuana card. They use the M word here. We don't use that at Curaleaf. And that, for me, is one aspect of, if you're going to be in this industry and to understand and know what it takes, no matter what position, if it's HR, if it's marketing, you have to first understand what it's like to be in the consumer's shoes, to look at it from that point of view and say, okay, well, what is cannabis? What can cannabis do for me? Do I qualify with this? So that you can really put yourself in that experience, so that no matter what your job is, you'll be able to relate it back to that consumer's experience. So here at Curaleaf, we're really, really big on our first priority is about our patients, is about that education. It's who we serve. It's the communities that we're serving, ensuring that we have presence in all communities. But being a patient, for sure, from my experience, is not frowned upon. It's actually a leg up, because it puts you in that patient's perspective. It teaches you, honestly, it's the best onboarding that anyone from an HR perspective can give you, because you're about to learn the entire program, the regulations, what you can do, what you can't do. You got to go to DOH. I know all about the marketing regulations, because it's all on the same DOH website that the patients have to look at as well. So we're in this together to say, you want to know about this industry, you want to work in this space, trust me, the first step is learn how to become a patient. You're going to learn so much. So it's definitely a shortcut to anything by being a patient and working in this space.
All right, it's good to hear. Now, from your perspective of seeing as how you're kind of a worldly individual, as far as the outreach approach is concerned, does it vary by region, seeing as how now you're in New York City, but having spent time in Albany, Georgia, two drastically different environments, would you say that your outreach approach is the same, or, how does it vary, being that, in places like Albany, churches are more influential versus in an area like New York? I mean, people are, religious there, but the church isn't the driving factor with regards to a lot of decision making.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, I have to correct you. It's Albany, okay? Albany is the capital of New York. I went to Albany State. You know what I'm saying? It's how you have to make sure you emphasize that second and third part of the syllable. Just teasing with you. But yes, so you do have to really change up your approach of outreach, not necessarily with demographics specifically from state to state, but we like to break it up where you have three different categories. So you have outreach to the community, which is about being a good community member, talking to businesses, addressing the stigma, addressing the social equity, addressing social issues. That is that community outreach. From there, you're looking at your traditional patient, or these are the people who are truly going to be in need of the product that you have. So we're talking about, specifically, we'll take my home state, New York, where it is probably arguably the most strictest medical cannabis state that's out there, where right now, combustion, so smoking is not even prohibited. So we're not allowed to sell whole flower, right, for the sake of actually inhalation. So it's an extremely medical program. And so we have to make sure that we're educating to that specific medical community. So we're talking about people who are suffering from cancer and ALS, the MS, chronic pain, the list goes on. And then that third bracket we break it into is our outreach to our practitioners. And so that's specifically in these medical communities, the doctors, they're still people, and believe it or not, their education around medical cannabis is what we give them, okay, several times. So we have a whole education department that's there to be able to inform, educate, talk about our products, to explain to them what exactly, not just Curaleaf, but what this program is, what their CME looks like, how often do they have to renew it, what kind of questions look like, what does their recommendation look like, this is what the consultation looks like with the patient. And so from those three brackets is what we're really able to break into our three different components of outreach, and step specifically by state. It absolutely varies, and but whether it's church, whether it's school, whether it's a doctor's office, whether it's a support group, they're going to fall into one of those three brackets of how we approach outreach.
All right, thanks for that answer. All right, gonna go from New York down to Tallahassee, Florida. Back to you, Chris. You mentioned earlier that you all have had some interns from FAMU or whatnot. So in the future, what roles do you see HBCUs playing in the development of the cannabis industry, as well as growth in cannabis companies?
Well, I think through programs like this, I think they play a huge role, because it is about education, it's about accessibility, it's about awareness. And I think that, they're being prepared to come into these companies and, get off to a running start. So I think they play an absolutely huge role in preparing people to come into the industry. Keith, did I answer? Or were you looking for something else? Because I can add.
Oh no, definitely continue.
Okay. Yeah, we're, as I said, we have, we do a lot of good things, but we have some opportunities, and that's one of the things I've been absolutely driving, being in Tallahassee, FAMU right there. There's no reason that we shouldn't have just an outstanding relationship with them. I mean, that should be, done. So we're pushing for that. And then we also have some other HBCUs around the country and Southeast that we are, targeting to establish partnerships with. So really looking forward to that. And, it's not just about necessarily, once people are ready to, graduate, being there for job fairs, but it's also establishing that relationship with, you know, the sophomores and the juniors, and kind of being there from a mentoring perspective or from a just a coaching perspective. And then, you know, of course, once they graduate, we'd love to hire them. But I think they play a very important role, and one that I know that, you know, we're going to be looking to tap into here very shortly.
Yeah, and I know the that 21-year age requirement can be a bit of a challenge with regards to trying to set up pipelines and various things like that. So you got to get kind of creative around that.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Next up, Najee. Question for you: with Viola being a, you know, the largest Black-owned cannabis company, do you feel that you all are taking a different approach to social equity or inclusion of Blacks in the cannabis industry? If so, could you go into a little detail about that?
Yeah. So we take it very personal when it comes to social equity, and also, you know, just the inclusion of Blacks in the cannabis space. So I think it's, you know, very often, you know, people look at it as, hey, minorities in the space, and they always push that, you know, creating opportunities for minorities in the space. And when you really look at it, minorities is very wide verse. So it goes into white women, it goes into trans, gay. It goes so wide verse that we want to, you know, create opportunities for Blacks, for our people in the space, and you know, jobs, of course, but ownership is really what we want to tap into. So we looking to create generational wealth for individuals in the space, and you know, along with, of course, jobs. So one of the things that we've taken on is the last round of social equity applicants in Los Angeles. We actually funded over 60 of the applications, where out of the 60, I believe down to 16 of the applications have gone through into the second phase. And I believe about half of those have gone into the final phase. So that's what we're doing. We're trying to put our money where our mouth is and really help create generational wealth in the space. So even out of those 60 applicants, if it wasn't one of the applicants that were selected from there, we've also created opportunities within the other companies that that we help with the applications to get opportunities to be able to have ownership in those as well. So that's something that we're really pushing for. We want to continue to create opportunities in the space on the social equity side, and just you know, bringing Blacks into the space as much as possible and showing the opportunities that cannabis can bring.
All right, it's good to hear. Then Lynette, just kind of following up with you regarding HBCU involvement, where do you all see the HBCU role in the development of the cannabis industry and the cannabis space?
Yeah, absolutely. To capitalize on what Chris was saying about the HBCUs, it's everything. Let me tell you, being an HBCU, we have been equipped, it has been ingrained in us to fight against the odds, okay? I won't tell you my age, but I'm 10 plus years from undergraduate at my HBCU, but I am still in this industry and in today's time having to educate people on what HBCU even stands for. The fact of the matter is a lot of people didn't have awareness around it until Beyonce's most recent homecoming. And so that right there alone, to say you have a huge population of educated Black people that are keeping to their roots and fighting against the odds amongst any and every industry is the best place to start when recruiting cannabis applicants for your company. Hands down, we are equipped for it. That's what they're training. That's what they teach us. Subconsciously and consciously, a part of the curriculum or not, is what we're learning being in our environment. So I will tell you now that I'm in day 8, I have just transitioned roles now with the company. And so I'm now director of talent management and diversity. And part of my strategy is 1000% is connecting with all of our HBCUs to build in a bridge, that program, a co-op, if you will, so that we can constantly not only recruit, but we're able to add specifically from our HBCU communities to our management positions, as well as continuing that education so that people get access to how to grow cannabis. You know, you understand we're a vertically integrated operation. So any aspect from seed to sale, it's not just about agriculture or horticulture. Okay, that's one amazing aspect of it, but we also have the business management aspect. You have scientists, you have finance, you have marketing, you have supply chain, you have government relations, and guess what? Every single one of those departments, we have qualified students that are waiting and ready to work in this space, who are skilled, but most importantly, as we all can tell you, that this industry is a challenge. It is fast. You have to be flexible. You have to be able to solve problems. You have to be able to work with what you got to make it work. Who knows that better than a minority who went to an HBCU? So I'm so passionate about it. I think it's phenomenal. And I think we all need to continue to go back to our roots because not only is it the right thing to do to constantly go back, and I think as Rashad was saying, not just leave the door open, but bust it wide open and bring everybody you have. But most importantly, we have the skill set to make this industry better than where it even right now is even projected to be. It's even better because we know both sides, right? In order for this industry to work, you got to know the history and you got to know the future. And our HBCU candidates absolutely have both.
Can definitely agree with you on that one. All right, next up, Reese. What would you say would be 3 things that you'd like to see in the cannabis space in the next 2 to 3 years from a development standpoint, as far as providing opportunities for minorities, as well as making your job even better?
Yeah, so one of the things that I would like to see, just general from a marketing perspective, is just more Black positive images of us consuming cannabis. Right now, if you Google cannabis model, white people everywhere enjoying cannabis. Whereas that just, unfortunately, that just sort of puts the negative stereotype into people's heads about cannabis and what it actually is, and how, you know, it's actually a healing plant. This plant is literally made for us to heal ourselves and heal our bodies. Our ancestors used this plant. And so just advocating and educating the plant from a healing perspective, and seeing Black people enjoying the plant and having fun, and like, this is what we do. Like, cannabis is fun. It's natural. It's something that, again, we can simply enjoy. And unfortunately in marketing, it's not seen. So one of the things that I'm doing in marketing, just again, I joined 3 weeks ago. I'll be working on our brand ambassador program, and then also our paid media. And that's going to be my #1 priority. Black images, period. And even when I joined cannabis, I kind of called marketing out, and I was like, why aren't there any, you know, Black people on our Instagram feed? What's going on? And that was like maybe 4 or 5 months ago. So that's one thing. The second thing is, you know, that's the marketing side, but I would simply just, why we're all here today, I just want to see more of my peers, more people who look like me in the room, whether that's, you know, at my current company or wherever I'm working. Just more people that look like me, that are, you know, Black, in this industry, killing it in some aspect or some form. I think I've said this a few times, and even Lynette just kind of said this too, like, there's multiple, you know, spaces within the industry that we can pivot into. You know, HBCU grad or not, I'm unfortunately not an HBCU grad. Shout out to all of you. But yeah, just seeing more of us working in this space. And then the third thing is just, I would like to see more of these white-owned companies actually take a true stand in social equity and actually actively work towards a socially equitable industry. There's a lot of companies out there who simply are not doing it, and it's really unfortunate to see. I would say to everybody on this call who's, listening as an attendee, to make sure you are doing your research on some of these some of these companies, and unapologetically go into that interview asking these questions, because that's something I did with Caliva. Ask these questions like, what are you guys doing for social equity? Maybe, maybe you do look at their Instagram feed and it's a bunch of white people on there and there's nothing Black, nothing speaking to who this plan is. Not for, the plan is for everybody, but what this plant was built on, and before it was criminalized, this is something we use. So ask these questions when you're going into the interviews, and that's just something that I would like. Those are like the three things that I would like to see, is just, just more diversity in the space, specifically Black people, and not just the minorities, kind of like how Najee alluded to, is like, minorities, that can mean a lot of things. We need to be more specific. Black people need to be in this industry, and it's really that simple. And so that's what I would like to see, and just across the board.
Well, that's good to hear. And while we're on the topic, I know, as we mentioned before, legislation is definitely, one of the biggest challenges when it comes to just cannabis operations, marketing, and various things like that. And then also, in addition to that, being at the ground level from the grassroots standpoint, one of the biggest complaints about the cannabis space right now is the corporatization, or corporate companies moving in and kind of, taking away from the true identity. So in your role in marketing, how do you look to, find that balance of being able to represent us legally, in addition to, moving us away from the stigma, but then also promoting or maintaining the historical cannabis culture?
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm going to be kind of looking at in this new role that I'm in marketing is, right now, I don't want to say too much about how we're marketing and what that really means at the company I currently work for. But there are certain things that I have vocalized to the board and to the director of marketing, on things that I want to see. And it's kind of the things that I previously mentioned before with your last question. But for me, it's like, we can hold these space, we can, market to certain people and certain demographics and make it cutesy and all these other things. But at the end of the day, this is a plant that has been criminalized, and it's something that we have to understand the history. As our peers who I work with, they have to understand the history. They have to understand the sort of like need to, I guess in a way, advocate for the plant in like a different perspective. But I think the biggest thing is understanding that this plant, you have to take a different sort of approach to it with marketing, simply because there are so many restrictions. But just because there are so many restrictions, it does not mean you only market to like a certain organization or a certain group of people, or you don't sort of tap into some of the major marketing strategies. It's more so about understanding who the end consumer is and who this plant has affected, and actually talking to those consumers through your marketing strategies. And so that's what I'm really going to be looking to do in this new role, is really talking to the end consumer and educating them on what the plant really is.
All right. Yep. Definitely know that it's an uphill challenge. All right. Next up, Rashad, we're going to come back to you. From an advocacy standpoint, what would you say are some of the moving forward, or some of the biggest uphill challenges that you see facing the industry, or you see yourself facing over the next 1 to 3 years?
So I think the one thing is legislation. It's kind of getting some of these medicinal states to get to recreational, which we know a lot of states are running, potential ballot initiatives, and localities are also running potential legislation to kind of open that up. Due to Corona, as you guys can imagine, there's a lot of tax gulf that a lot of people need to fill in now. And so this cannabis opportunity just seems like an opportunity for a lot of these companies or these states to just tax the hell out of these companies, basically to damn near death, but still try to fill their coffers up as much as they can as possible. I think a big part of it is educating our community about the legislative process and and also getting into the weeds of the policy and getting into some of the weeds of these ordinances to really understand where the loopholes are, where the potholes are, and where are like the pipelines for you to get through the process smoothly. I think a lot of people don't think that, just applying for an application is enough, and you have to realize that you're competing with people with much more capital than you at times, and some people have just a much more bandwidth and understanding of the industry. And so in order for you to kind of line your ducks up the best way, you got to start getting involved with the community and the advocacy groups that speak to cannabis users, like the ASAs and the Normals and some of these social equity groups. And then also you got to start going and visiting your legislator, whether it's at the state or the local. If you have a connection with a state legislator, typically local legislators like to follow what the state guy is doing, especially if they have somebody that will be a shining example of what they want their programs to look like. And so I think it's really important for us to kind of mobilize and get on the same page on what we're asking for. Working with some of the larger industry groups in California, like CCIA and some of these groups, cannabis advocacy is often denoted and cast aside because no one is dancing to the same beat. Everyone is dancing to their own rhythm and asking for different things, or sometimes asking for the same thing from two different people, which only undermines the movement in the eyes of a legislator, because they definitely want to hear a broad coalition of support with some identified and tangible, reasonable asks in order to help the industry. And so I think we got to get the advocacy on point and get the outreach so people can understand that they have a voice and they can line their ducks up. And I think it's also extremely, extremely important for us. And it's kind of the same with the education system. Like when you want something better for your kid, but maybe you're not educated, you don't know how to advocate, and you also don't feel confident advocating for yourself. And so it's really just channeling that confidence and knowing that what we're asking for is not only what we deserve, but if you don't ask for it with your chest in the way that you're supposed to, you're not going to get the buy-in that you want, and you're not going to force people to acknowledge whether they're racist and they are okay with the wrongdoings of the war on drugs, or if they actually have a spirit to try to heal it the best way they can. So I would say, like, the biggest point is to really force these people to talk about what the war on drugs have done to our community and why we also smoke so much cannabis in these communities to deal with the trauma of living in these impoverished areas, and force these legislators to really acknowledge and eat that data and make a decision. Because at this point, you can't sit on the fence anymore. And if you are sitting on the fence, then we've got to be prepared to knock you down off the fence because you're not representing us and what we're asking for.
Right. I definitely agree with that. All right. Michael, bringing it back to you. With you being located in the state of Illinois, which compared to a lot of the other states that have implemented or have allowed for legalization, there's a little bit more creativity when it comes to being able to get involved in the cannabis space. And what I mean by that is, in addition to dispensaries and cultivation, individuals are also able to get licenses for spaces to consume cannabis, whether it be somewhat of like a restaurant environment or something like that. So what are your recommendations? And with you all having the incubator program that you have, and you get all types of questions and people coming to you, figuring out how can they qualify for the program. What are your recommendations for individuals before they come to you? What would be the top 5 things that you would say they need to have in order when they're dotting their I's and crossing their T's in order to be able to even appeal to you all as for your incubator program?
It's so interesting you asked that question, because as we in Illinois get ready to hear who has won the first round of adult use dispensaries that were not, grandfathered in from the medical program, I'm writing that criteria literally right now. I'm looking at the criteria right here, like, okay, you've been a part of the application process, and now you've won a license. Now, how do you get into the incubator from the point of, from phase 2, from the point of operation, from the point of license to operations? But I would say just in general, to get into the incubator program, I think Reese hit it on the head, hit the nail on the head several times. By doing your research, you need to do your homework. I cannot stress that enough. And I think maybe Rashad said this too. You're competing against people who have access to capital, resources, network, information, just people in their family, like the things that people have and are ready to invest coming into this industry. I think as Black folks, as social equity applicants, in the purest sense of it, I don't think we're really aware of what, I think we're becoming aware, but I think folks, when this first started here in Illinois, folks were, we're already 5 years behind or 7 years behind, because the medical industry in Illinois has been going since 2013. So considering that we're already behind, you have to upskill yourself as quickly as possible. I'm looking at, to get into the incubator program, one of the things you have to do is submit a business plan. I'm looking at a business plan with not one number in it. That's not gonna work. That's just not gonna work. I appreciate your passion. I appreciate, your interest and, your desire. But if you don't have any numbers, if you haven't thought about how this is going to impact you financially and what you're gonna do financially, even if you're asking questions, just show me you thought about it, as opposed to, I'm gonna get in this incubator, Cresco Labs is gonna expose me to subject matter experts, and I'm gonna write this application, or, I'm gonna open this business and I'm gonna live happily ever after. Illinois is one of the most highly regulated states for cannabis. And so it's just not gonna cut it. So do your homework, know what your business is going to be focused on. Look at the other states that have been in adult use and in the medical market much longer than Illinois, or as we move further east or to the south. Let them be your model and guide for what is possible in the cannabis industry. Because I think as we get more sophisticated, as the industry gets more, evolves more, gets more mature, there's gonna be lots of different things that you can do than, just make some cookies or sell flour or, get really creative and what is going to be your niche in the industry. Think about and develop your financial plan. How are you going to address the compliance issues and the regulatory issues? Because if that's not forefront in your mind, one fine from the state of Illinois could put a small business owner out of business in the cannabis industry, because not only do you have to come up with about $1 million to even successful, to even think about competing in the dispensary arena, you also have to have money to stay in business. And as you make mistakes, as you learn, that's going to be costly. So how are you going to absorb those costs and still keep your doors open? So those are the things that I'm looking for, is that you understand this industry up until this point. And even if you don't know how to do it, even if you don't have the resources to do it, tell me you've thought about it and that you know that this is a challenge that you're going to have to overcome.
Right. No, that's definitely good to hear. And you mentioned, a business plan definitely needs to have numbers. And with this being, a relatively new industry and different things like that, how would you recommend people going about getting those numbers to understand, what's realistic? Like, you mentioned $1 million to get started, but it could be way more than that when you start talking about property acquisition, tools, and yada yada yada. So what do you recommend? What's a range, a realistic range of cost that people should expect getting into it, and what are some sources for being able to get some realistic numbers?
I would say what's realistic is $1 to $2 million, at least in the Illinois market. You can decrease that by not wanting to put it in Chicago. The further away you get from Chicago, the cheaper it will be, because number one, real estate costs less. Number two, you don't have to worry about the zoning issues in Chicago. You just focus on the specific municipality or the suburb in which you're looking to put your dispensary or your craft grow facility. So yeah, I think you need to really think about, how do you raise a couple $1 million to start? And then how do you get those numbers? I think, just like anything else, do your research, reach out to people who have already done it. If you reach out to me and you want that information, I have no idea. I've never opened a dispensary. I work for a cannabis company, but all of my colleagues do. All of my colleagues, I sat across from the legal team. There's the retail team. There's a finance department. All of those people I can put you in contact with at Cresco. And I think all of my colleagues here on the call will be willing to do that as well, to the extent where that's appropriate and possible. I try to, when people come and ask me questions, I don't know, to be honest. My specialty and expertise is in social justice and community programming. So I don't know how to open up a retail facility, but I know someone who does. So do your research on LinkedIn. Who are the people that work at Cresco or at Curaleaf that have the answers that you're looking for? Reach out to them and ask them those questions. Use your network. You'd be surprised who or who that knows somebody that you need to get those answers. But I think the overall answer to the question is it's a grind, it's a hustle, because if you had the information that Cresco has, then you would be Cresco, or you would be Curaleaf, or you would be one of these big corporations. So, people aren't in the business just giving it to you,
Right.
But in the space of social equity, we are, but you got to know the right people to ask, So
Right.
just start asking.
Definitely. Sean, coming back to you, as far as within the next 1 to 3 years, what would you like to see improved about the cannabis industry, as well as job opportunities or your job description in general?
Yeah, next 1 to 3 years. I would like to eventually probably have my own fully vertically integrated company, preferably. But I think one thing I want to shift into probably in the near future is more cannabis tech, looking at a lot of the different tools that the cannabis companies have at their disposal to market and tell the story and connect with different consumers. I think there's a huge disconnect from not only from a dispensary level, but from a brand level. If I was actually growing product, I think I will want to take on that challenge next and develop some new tools to help everybody in the industry, whether you're B2B or B2C, learn more about the plant, connect with it, and find a great product that is to your liking. There's so many different products. There's the flower, there's topicals and tinctures, and so there's just so much that consumers are trying to intake in so little time, since it's a new industry, that I think the cannabis tech can be a huge opportunity in the next 1 to 3 years.
Right. Yep, definitely agree with that. So coming to you, Chris, seeing as how you come from a CPG background and now being in the cannabis industry, and also being in the South, where the thought process is a lot more conservative, and people are just getting on board, with the concept of extracts and various things like that. What do you see from a product development standpoint, as well as just product creativity, to see the cannabis space moving in the next 1 to 3 years?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something that I'm not the marketing person, but I get involved in a lot of those conversations. I think Florida specifically, the big opportunity for us will be around edibles, and we hope to see those rules come down, I would say in the next month or so. So I think that's going to be huge, because edibles is an entry point, for some into the category. One of my buddies up in DC, he called, he's like, "What company are you with again?" He said, "Man, I'm eating these edibles and it helps me go to sleep." And so that'll be big for the Florida market for sure. And then as you look at, places like Georgia and Alabama, they're going to be, medical marijuana first, right? So they're going to start out, very slow with a lot of restrictions. And I would say, once they go, probably, in the next couple of years after that, they'll go rec. And I think that you know, the time it used to take from trends that you saw in places like California and Colorado to make it to the East, it was a while. But I think now that, you know, there's more and more, obviously, states that are you know, getting in the game, it's not going to take that long. So things like, you know, live resin type of products, right? You see that big out in California, you see that in Colorado. You know, you go up to Massachusetts, you don't. Pennsylvania, you know, you don't. You see a little bit. Florida, you see a little bit. So I think things like that you'll see kind of making it, you know, from West Coast to East. But I'll tell you, for us, I mean, you know, we look at a lot of the data, and for me specifically, I do look at, you know, what's happening out in California, you know, what's happening out in Colorado, because I think, you know, those trends are predictors as to what you're going to see in markets like Florida and Pennsylvania and New Jersey and Massachusetts. But the next couple of years, I fully expect the Northeast to, you know, be booming. And as you said, you know, Keith, the South is going to take, you know, it's going to take a little longer. But, you know, we hope to see Georgia, you know, we're actually in application process now, but hope to see them moving along. And then we'll see, you know, what happens with Alabama, and we'll keep on moving up.
Yeah.
But
okay, and with that being said, seeing as how you used to be with PepsiCo, and you know, right now still in the conservative mind frame, when people think edibles, they're thinking gummies, brownies, this, that, and the other. But in fact, you know, when you go to places like California and Colorado, where you see a more developed industry, you start thinking about infused meals and various things like that. And being that I'm in Atlanta, Coca-Cola is a very conservative company in the grand scheme of things. How long do you think it'll take before your CPGs, like your PepsiCos and your Coca-Colas, you know, jump into the industry and just completely, you know, kick the door down and start putting cannabis in their products, seeing as how, you know, Coke actually started off with cocaine in it, hence the name. You know, what do you know, from your background at Pepsi, what do you think those guys are thinking about?
you know, I think they're taking a look at it. I mean, to answer your question, I mean, when do I see them, you know, kind of jumping in? Just one man's opinion. I think it's going to have to be, you know, some sort of, you know, federally legal type position before those guys get into it. At the end of the day, I mean, they're looking for every single opportunity to, you know, make money, but it's going to have to be, you know, federally legal. And it's interesting because you have some, you know, companies like the True Leaf or the Cresco, the Pure Leaf, and we're vertically integrated. We're doing, you know, seed to sale. And then you have other, you know, brands out there that are taking more kind of the CPG perspective. So they're not necessarily looking to, you know, grow and retail. They're licensing their, you know, their SOPs and their brands and all that for us to make it. But at the end of the day, what they're doing is what, you know, typical CPG, they're trying to build a brand, build a national brand, you know, work with local people to kind of get that going. And it's all setting it up for when this thing becomes, you know, legal, and you have the Cokes and you have the Pepsis and General Mills and Kellogg's and you know, the pharmaceutical companies that are then, you know, jumping in and buying these brands up. So it's just interesting to see, you know, as I sit back, kind of the different approaches for, you know, some of the companies, and then, you know, some of the people that are absolutely looking at this from, hey, let me get my brand growing, because I know that those Pepsis and Cokes are going to be, you know, ready to jump in once, you know, some of the once it becomes legal.
Right. No, definitely interesting to see what happens. All right. Next question is for you, Rashad. We just, as Chris mentioned, you know, the federal, once it goes legal at the federal level, it'll kind of open things up. And I guess from an advocacy standpoint, you know, one of the things of frustration is looking at how states, especially in the South or, you know, even in the Northeast, or, you know, different approaches are taking this slow conservative approach. You know, once legalization happens at the federal level, and these states that have taken the slow roll approach with regards to legalization, whether it be medical or adult use, what is the impact of legalization at the federal level, and how does that speed things up, or how does that change the landscape? And for those states that haven't gotten on board with the states like California, Oregon, and Colorado, how does that impact them, and, you know, what changes will that force on them?
So So I think it's kind of like a two-prong issue. So I think once federally it's legal, you're thinking about banking, you're thinking about capital, you're thinking about publicly traded companies where billions and billions of dollars will begin to flow. And I think once you watch the trickle-down effect of legalization at the federal level to some of these more conservative and southern states, they are typically overly business friendly and typically love to partner with businesses that they've been operating with in past political/business relationships. So I think what will happen is that the rug will be pulled from anybody who thought they may have an opportunity once federal legalization happens. You'll just have these big businesses, the PepsiCos, the Anheuser-Busch's, the Philip Morris's coming in. I mean, some of them have already put billions of dollars in some of these companies on the low. And so I think that once the federal legalization happens, you're going to see a lot of communities not even get a chance to put their name in the conversation. I don't know if you guys were aware, but I think 2 weeks ago, the kind of social equity cannabis congressional members voted against it being a platform for the Democratic National Convention because they know that things aren't cooked up enough in order for us to have a seat at the table holistically and genuinely. And so I think as federal legalization happens, we have to make sure that we, get our voices together, get our groups together, get our entities together, and support those champions at the congressional level that are voting against cannabis to be a platform thing for the Dem Convention because they haven't cooked out the social equity conversation. And so those are the Barbara Lees and the Karen Basses and those folks who basically are like, we're going to hold this up until we get a conversation about what it's truly going to look like and how this is going to benefit every state that's already operating or isn't operating, because we know what happens in those southern states in terms of economic opportunities for our people. Like, I don't know if we're going to have another Andy Young for cannabis in Georgia, right? And so it's really, the onus is on us to really centralize, organize, and get on the same accord so that we can support those legislators who are right now protecting us against ourselves and the push for federal legalization.
Right. No, definitely. All right. My next question is for you, Najee. Seeing as how, working with Viola, the landscape in which you guys are kind of navigating is a little bit different with, Al Harrington being a former athlete. And as Rashad just mentioned, there, still situations where people don't necessarily want to have their name out there on the forefront with regards to being associated with the industry, even though they may be interested in investing or participating as a silent partner or something like that. How do you all overcome those challenges with regards to, being able to bring in more minorities, but at the same time, them not wanting to be on the forefront or, having their name in the bright lights and things like that?
I don't think that we haven't faced any like huge challenges on that front. Of course, Al, being a former NBA player and some of his, some of his teammates and former colleagues investing into the company, we haven't really had an issue as far as like, them not wanting to be on the forefront. We don't necessarily look for anything as far as like from the investors that we do have and our Viola family to like be forefront and press and all that stuff. So we haven't come to any issues with it at all. We have different influencers and different people that we work with that love the product, but not necessarily is so open to, I guess like, social media and showing that they indulge in the product. But yeah, I see the same challenges that I've seen in like in the spirits industry with it. There was people who, love the product, love Ciroc, but it doesn't want to be in the forefront of posting it or for whatever reason that they have. But we haven't looked at it as like it being too much of a challenge at all, because like you said, everyone wants to get in it and everyone wants to invest. So they haven't had an issue with investing into it. It's just more so not wanting to be in the forefront. But we don't look at it as being a challenge for sure.
Right. And then with you, you being in marketing and trying to get the product out there and different things like that. What would you say would be like, I guess, the top 3 things that you'd like to see over the course of the next 1 to 3 years, regarding, your job, your being able to promote the brand, or, just promoting cannabis in general?
Yeah, I really want really just want it to be normalized. I feel like that's something that we really hone in on at Viola, is really looking at this as being an everyday essential. Something that is, to your question before, something that is very different with this and in the spirits industry is that this is something that is an essential product for someone to use on a daily basis all throughout the day. We always joke that, in the spirits industry, if someone woke up every single day and told you that they took a shot of whiskey or a shot of tequila, you'll be like, they're alcoholic. But it's more than, it's a large amount of people in this industry that wake up every day and that's the way they get their day started. And it's not looked down upon. It's not anything that interfere with their work. So we want to more so normalize the plant. So that, I think that's the biggest thing that we want to do is show the norm, show it being normalized. And then also one of our big initiatives is on the female end of it, I think, is making it normal for females to be open about indulging in cannabis. I think that for some reason there's been such a negative point of view on females indulging into it, and that's something that I think on our end, and me and our CMO Erica Pittman have been working very closely on, is opening it up for females being more open to being out and about as far as with cannabis, and they're indulging into cannabis. So I think it will be just more so normalizing the plant for the public view.
Yeah, no, definitely targeting women would be is a great strategy. I think there are a lot of closet cannabis consumers amongst women, especially your soccer moms and different things like that. And they just don't want that unladylike stigma or stereotype associated with them. But they're definitely great repeat customers.
Yeah.
Next question is for you, Lynette. A little bit of change of subject. Seeing as how one of the biggest challenges right now facing the cannabis space on the job front is drug testing. And so as legalization is taking place, whether it be from a medicinal standpoint or adult use standpoint, some companies are coming on board with regards to updating their workplace policies, while some have yet to adjust. And even in the cannabis space, there are some cannabis companies that don't allow for their employees to consume cannabis or whatnot. So what are you all doing, or what are cannabis companies doing from an advocacy standpoint to influence legislation or to protect employees in the workplace regarding cannabis use and consumption?
Yeah, absolutely, Keith. So you were right on that, 100%. And so specifically here at Curaleaf, I've had the privilege to connect and partner with our government relations team on several occasions. And we're doing exactly that, where we're taking it to the people who can make a difference, who can make a change. And so again, it's going back to the patients, who in this case, a lot of times are also employees of both in this industry, as well as making sure you have a full representation of other industries. We're talking about our veterans, our military community, okay? We're talking about teachers, we're talking about gun carriers. These are all other industries, our law enforcement, that have to make a decision between, do I, not use prescription medicine and have to, jeopardize my livelihood or my employment or my status at whatever company or industry to use medical cannabis. Those are not decisions that we believe people should be having to make. So we're working closely and partnering with our government relations team to advocate and lobby for exactly those efforts. Specifically at Curaleaf, we do drug testing, but not for cannabis, where we believe you're a patient. We don't obviously are not promoting, and of course, a lot of the state laws prohibit usage on site, things like that. So we have to obviously make reasonable accommodations for things and situations in that. But we are very proud of our medical roots. That's what we were founded on. We believe that this plant is used for medicinal purposes. It's absolutely a lot safer than many of those other alternatives are out there. But there's still a lot of work, not only on the drug testing aspect, with having to pay out of pocket, where we have seen many times patients have to make a decision between paying a light bill and paying for their medical cannabis. That's crazy, where you can get, one of these prescription drugs over the counter for zero or very minimal, and you don't have that situation. And so there's a lot that needs to be done from that legislation side. And so from a Curaleaf standpoint, from a community member, from an activist standpoint, we partner together with several other industries that I just named, as well as with our government relations teams, to hopefully continue to push that conversation, to advocate so people do not have to be put or forced into making those critical life decisions.
All right, it's definitely good to know. Now we're going to close it out, and we're going to move on to our HBCU spotlight.
Today our spotlights are Howard, Hampton, and Morgan State.
I feel like for some reason I couldn't be heard there. Thanks, Troy. So the first spotlight is Howard University. Howard University, located in Washington, D.C. and founded in 1867, has an enrollment of over 9,000 students, and 6,100 of those are undergraduates. It's one of the private research universities, and it has 13 schools and colleges in its system. And it's one of the most comprehensive HBCUs, offering more than 120 areas leading to undergraduate, graduate, and professional degrees. Next slide, Troy. And it's one of the top 3 rankings in several categories. Law schools by median salary, it's number 1. Top 50 HBCU medical schools, number 1. Top 20 HBCUs total, number 2. Top 20 HBCUs with online programming, number 3. Next school, Hampton U, the other HU that there's always a struggle about. Hampton is, the motto is the standard of excellence in education for life. Hampton is consistently ranked in the top 5 HBCUs in the nation. Next slide, Troy. It was founded in 1868 and offers technical, liberal arts, and graduate degrees. Their undergraduate enrollment is 3672, which they're really proud of because it promotes smaller class sizes and more intimate learning spaces. They have a graduate enrollment program of 649 students with 16 research centers and 10 accredited schools and colleges. And our last campus for today is Morgan State. And it is known to award more bachelor's degrees to African-American students than any campus in Maryland. Its core values are excellence, integrity, respect, diversity, innovation, and leadership. Founded in 1867 and was shifted to a university designation in 1975. It's the only public HBCU in Baltimore, Maryland, and is designated as Maryland's preeminent public urban research university with 125 academic programs in business, engineering, education, architecture, social work, hospitality, management, arts, and sciences, and that was a lot of expansion since the 1980s. Those are our 3 schools for this session, and if you want more information, remember that we try to spotlight different schools and universities throughout all 8 of the series, so you can go back and check some of our other conversations.
Thank you.
Tessa?
Thank you so much, Tiff. We're gonna head over to our Cresco Spotlight with Michael. Michael?
Hear me okay?
Okay. Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, so I'll be really brief because everybody has really covered a lot of the things that I would want to talk about with respect to careers in cannabis. I think the biggest things are whether you want to be an entrepreneur or you want to work for a cannabis company, or you want to build your own cannabis company, I think the first steps are really about doing your research, building your network. This is not something that can happen overnight. And while you are students or just starting out your career, now is a perfect time to get into this industry and to start building your network and to start asking those questions. And I think because the industry is relatively in its infancy, so it's okay not to know and to come to the table without having the prerequisite experience that people are looking for, because we're all building that knowledge base, and we're all building that cannabis specific experience as the industry grows. So you have the opportunity to really grow with the industry. I think the biggest thing, the biggest takeaway is just, don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Believe in yourself, believe in your skills, be unapologetic about it. As big cannabis companies are continuing to get bigger, in order for us to have and to maintain legitimacy, we have to acknowledge the injustice of the cannabis industry. And because we have to acknowledge that injustice, we are, specifically motivated in, mitigating that injustice. So this is a great time to really get in and to say, here I am, this is what you all said you stand for. So hold us accountable to what we say we stand for. And you do that by doing your homework and showing up to the door or to the interview or to the incubator, knowing what you want, knowing the ins and outs of it, and being ready to work.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you to all of our guests today in developing this initiative. And I didn't say it earlier, I attended Clark Atlanta University, so I'm also HBCU certified like everyone else. And my experience growing up in California and always being in these multicultural, diverse situations never gave me the sense of confidence that I gained by attending a historically Black college and university. I have a level of confidence that I know is different from a lot of the people that are around me. I know that HBCU students make up our upper middle class. They make up our upper middle class. We produce Black families. We produce Black communities. We sustain those communities. And it was very important for me to find African Americans in this space. Being here in California, I started the process last year of getting some of my cannabis license. I acquired my cannabis festival license, and I'm working on my vertical license right now. And, I see equity and how it's played out here. And although California is the first, we're also the first, I think, to fail at equity here, specifically in Oakland and just in the Bay Area in general. LA is a big, crazy situation now where, you have all of these proprietary folks that are coming in and they're not creating pipelines that allow us to get in. And with you all being on here, you've come in and you've created fluidity to this pipeline so that folks can see there are opportunities for me to be in the plant touching side as a career, opportunities for me to be in auxiliary aspect where, like Michael has her position, you're doing human resources. And then some folks on our previous shows where we talked about STEM and the programs that we're working on, is to push them and push African Americans in the best circumstances that we can. And that's with us having these opportunities for community. That's with us sharing our privilege, sharing our resources. And like I said, I've had a social justice background. I've been politically involved since I was 19, been on boards. I'm a commissioner for the city of Berkeley. And I just realized the most impactful thing that I've done is to share that privilege. And that's what we're all here doing. I feel like our guests and our participants have definitely shared great experiences that have opened up, hopefully for our participants, open up your minds and open up just the way that you think about things. Because, I've heard about 3 or 4 of you say, like, you didn't smoke marijuana. I say this on every show. I love marijuana. I'm so happy to be in California where it became recreational. And just prior to that, just being in an environment where in Berkeley, we've been able to grow plants in the city of Berkeley since the 70s. And so, like you said, marijuana has always been around me. I have 14-year-old twins. I have cannabis. I have stems and leaves all over my house. So as a parent, you know, I've had to make sure that I instill a sense of responsibility, you know, in them. Even when their friends come over, I have a 4-year-old niece and I have plants in the backyard, and she says, those are your Auntie Chasa's medical plants. And I'm like, those are my medical plants, because I grow everything in the backyard, you know, plums, tomatoes, and all that. But it's just about how we can incorporate it into the African American community so that we can break the stigmas, so that there's more Seans and there's more Reese's and there's more Lynette's and Chris and Michael and Najee and everyone. Because other than that, we're going to be in the same position historically as we have been when we're fighting for our civil rights. It's like we're being reactive. And right now we all have the opportunity, the privilege, and the position for us to be proactive. And that is my goal with this initiative. That's my goal with our sessions. And that's just my overall, you know, goal for our social equity work that we're doing. And so I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thanking all of our guests. I think Rashad had to jump off, but Rashad wanted me to share his information with all of you. So I'll send you an email, because Rashad wanted to connect individually with all of you. If you guys want us to connect you with anyone, please let me know. Tiff, do you have any final words or?
Yeah, just a couple. So we had about 12 questions that we're probably going to have to push to people individually and get your comments. We're trying to create an FAQ from these sessions, and we have quite a few for folks, and we're going to share that back out with the communities. Just so you all know, we've had upwards of 300 folks register for these calls, and this kind of community that we're building is just for this. It is to create the space. There were lots of things that came up in the conversations today, and the whole, like, from seed to sale concept, and understanding that as a mechanism for employment is really critical. And that was one of the reasons why this conversation was so important, to show that there are different ways to come into this work. And like Michael just said, it's a relatively new industry. Let's not call it new anymore, because it's been here for a minute, right? But the truth is, you can transfer skills from other opportunities into this industry, and in ways that you can really craft your own place, because it hasn't been done here yet, right? Like, I think that there's some really important things that were highlighted throughout our conversations, right? Chris's experience with more traditional Fortune 500 companies, and how some of those systems are going to end up coming into play into this industry. And how do we really translate those? How do we prepare our students to be ready to come in and take those positions? The fact that every organization needs human resources, I don't care if you have one person or 100, right? Like, the fact that those are things. Everyone on here talked about the importance of marketing and promotions and all of that. Like, because if no one knows you have a product, you have no product to sell, right? So all of us really understanding and looking at, while you are in your current HBCUs, and we have Black folks on the call that are not, we don't exclude y'all, we love y'all too. Please know though, that while you're in school, there's lots of research to be done about this industry, and being out and being ready to come and partner. Because imagine if all of these people on here had your really highly qualified resume to look at the next time they have positions available. So we just wanted to make sure that we said, as a team, thank you to all of you for participating in this conversation. We do not expect this to be a one-time only conversation. We hope to be continuing these and creating a true pipeline from our HBCUs into employment with you all. So that's it from me, Chas.
Thank you, Tiff. And as Tiffany said, we plan to have another session this fall, and we're kind of figuring out how we're going to twerk that for this fall, because I've gotten a lot of calls from folks that have missed the opportunities, and everyone has said, like, all the guests are great, and I thought that, you know, maybe we could do something. Our format would allow us to have more one-on-one conversations with some of the folks and be more specific in those conversations during the fall. So I'm figuring all that out, you know, right now. But again, I'd like to thank you all for your participation. I'd like to thank you all for your melanin permeating through the cannabis industry. I love it. I don't see it here in California, but it's good to see us. Like, we're on the East Coast, West Coast, in the South. We're going to get there soon, you know, once we break down these walls. But again, I want to thank you all, and Everyone have a great day.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, you guys.
Lynette, you know what I wanted to tell you? You look just like my friend Kim.
Kim,
and I was gonna. She's my best friend.
Shots, I'm jumping off.
Okay, yeah.
I'll check in with you later.
Like